and they're very intuitive when you think about them and how they work, how they iteratively loop over something. However, they are not very common in R. There are other ways that I've shown you previously. They're using shortcuts like across, or using vectorization, which involves restructuring data, or using the apply function that I've showed you in previous versions. However, just for completeness, I am going to show you a quick example of the basic concept of a for loop. Okay, so let's go to R. Before I'll show you this for loop down here, which looks kind of complicated, I have to quickly introduce two more things. One is the nCall function, and it actually just gives you the number of columns in any data frame. So I call the nCall function on our grades data frame. Remember, in the previous video we created the grades data frame, which includes information on the grades of students in the years 2010, 2020 for all students, around 1,000 students in the data set. All right, if we call the nCall function, down here in the console, we'll see that there are 11 rows, okay? So the nCall function just gives you the number of rows. Now, the second thing I need you to remember right now is how R accesses matrices. And by a matrix, I just mean columns and rows, right? Basically a spreadsheet type format. And you can use the square brackets to access particular columns and rows, so particular cells, right? So if I, for example, use the data frame grades and I put in square brackets after it 1, 1, this means R, give me the value in the first row and the first column. Okay, if I do that, here I get a 3.1. If we go to the grades data set, you see first row, first column is a 1. So this would be second row, second column. Okay, and so forth. Using this approach, you can access any field, any cell in the data matrix, right? Which in our case is just a data frame. All right. If you leave the number empty, it will automatically give you all rows or columns respectively. Let's check it out. If I leave the first space just empty, it gives you all rows. Well, actually it gives you the first 10 here, saying there are 990 more, because it won't display all 1,000 rows, right? If you do it the other way around, if you swap it, you put 1 for the row and nothing for the column, it just gives you all the columns. And you see here, actually for the first row, you have these 9 values here, plus 2 more that are on display for space issues, right? So knowing that now, the nCall function and its brackets of accessing a data frame, we can run this loop. All right, this is how it goes. You call the for loop and you say for every column in this data frame, and the grades 2 is identical with the grades 1, right? Just to show you. We created it earlier, but it's just the identical data frame. It's the grades for every student in the data set per year, okay? So for every column in the data frame grades, and more particularly from column 1 to, remember this nCall function calls the number of columns in the grades 2 data set now. That means from columns 1 to 11, because we had 11 columns, right? From the column 1 to 11, right, take the grades data set, and for all rows, replace column, which is a value we define here, right, with the same value, right, the same value here, plus 1. So in this example, imagine that the university administration asked you to adjust the grading scale, right? They actually went from 0 to 6, but that was a mistake. The grades actually go from 1 to 7, let's say. So all we need to do is add a 1 to every value in the data set, okay? So we're in a way looping over every value, each time adding just 1 point, okay? So this is what this loop does. You know, you define a placeholder, just a name, which you're gonna then iteratively replace. And we called this call. We could name this anything really, but we called this call, And this call appears here in our in our command, and this is what we're aiming to replace. So grades2 across all rows. Here is the placeholder that we want to replace. We're going to replace it with the same placeholder except for +1. Okay. We did this. Now let's check out the grades one. We see here the first value is now 4.1, so we added 1. In the old data set, it was a 3.1. So the most important thing to take away is here that for a loop, if you're using a for loop in R, you can loop over anything. In this case, we looped over columns, right? And we replaced each column value, actually all row values in each column, by the same value +1. Okay, this is what we did here. You could run a for loop across anything. It's highly customizable, and it can get fairly complex. And you should always think for a moment, what's the best strategy here for my iteration problem? Should I use the apply function? Should I use a for loop? Should I just use the vectorization approach of reshaping the data? Or is there another easy shortcut like the across function, right? Okay, this was a short intro to the for loop. It gets way more complicated, but this is a brief introduction just to understand the main intuition and the concept behind it.